Every now and again, a company will release a product into the market that defines what happens decades on. For Harley, it has always been the Knucklehead. This here 1939 Harley Davidson Knucklehead for me has always been the epitome of the brand itself. Stay tuned for a complete in-depth review of this incredible, timeless, beautiful machine and how you can be the next owner of it. Zdraví, dobrodošli, bon dia, bem-vindos, servus, willkommen, buenos dias, bienvenidos, greetings riders, and welcome to another very special review. Pegasus Motorcycle Tours and Consulting, yours truly, Nick here. Thank you for your time and your attention. It's a sincere privilege to present you, I believe, one of the best looking, sexiest motorcycles I've ever had a chance to touch, to review, and to ride. Stay tuned for that footage. This year is a 1939 Harley Davidson Knucklehead. Now in this review, I'm going to break this motorcycle down for you, tell you why it's special. Everybody knows the Knucklehead, but the history is quite fascinating. This motorcycle right here defined the production of Harley for decades on. In fact, some of the parts that are on this motorcycle influenced production up until 1999. That's how well built this motorcycle is. So, before we get into those details, I would urge you to stay till the end so you can hear about how you can be the next owner of this motorcycle. Needless to say, they are increasingly more difficult to find, as are the original parts to make them whole again. World War II, of course, had a huge effect on production since the materials were in essence scarce and used for the war effort. So it's a true privilege to have a 1939 right at the eve of World War II. Now that year is very important because the Harley Knucklehead came, as it was known within the riding crowd. It's actually the Model E, started in 1936. The release was a little bit early according to Harley itself. They were hoping to have a little more time to work on it, but the release was preempted by the excellent products in the Indian line. Indian, of course, established 1901, a few years before Harley, America's first motorcycle company, and one of the only two, along with Harley, to make it through the Great Depression. For Harley, it was exactly this machine right here and all the innovative designs incorporated into it that pushed that company through all the hardest parts of that whole time. 1929, of course, when the stock market crashed. There was only another company in America making motorcycles at the time that was able to make it through, Excelsior. This was by the Schwinn bicycle company, but after the Depression, I believe in 31, that company closed doors as well. So, 1939 Harley Davidson Knucklehead. Why Knucklehead? Knucklehead is the name given to it to reflect the design of the head up here. The head looks like fists, basically, and I agree. I think it's a gorgeous, gorgeous looking motor to look at it. 45-degree V-twin, of course. The first iteration was modeled letter E. That's the name of this motorcycle. Pushed out about 37 horsepower at that time. A few improvements later designated the motorcycle EL. ES as well was created at the time. ES was produced basically to support a sidecar. This here is an EL. And in the EL model, the horsepower was pushed to 40 and sitting on a 565-pound brand new chassis and frame, this motorcycle was feeding the need at the time of an era of increased development of asphalt in the United States and the need for faster, stronger, more exciting motorcycles. This bike fed that need quite well and continues to do so. As you can see, it's been incredibly beautifully restored. It actually achieved a 99 out of 100 grade from the American Classic Motorcycle Association. Everything has been restored to the original, including the paint color and these very rare wheels. The only point that was docked, and rightly so, and I'm glad that it remained that way, is for this gorgeous Cat Eye Speedometer. That was the first time Harley Davidson decided to include the speedometer in its line of motorcycles as a standard feature, and this Cat Eye was left untouched, and I love that about the motorcycle. It shows 2,223 miles, and it rides like it too. It rides like a new motorcycle of that era would ride. Even more so because the internals of this motorcycle have been improved to address some of the issues that early knuckleheads had. Now, those issues involve mostly oil leakage. Oil leakage was predominant because this was the first time Harley Davidson introduced this overhead valve system. In fact, that's the nickname of this bike, OHV. So I should correct, it wasn't exactly the first time, it was the first time in production line motorcycles. Harley, of course, did play with this type of design in its race machines as well, but for the production line, this is the first time that the knucklehead had overhead valves. Before that, you can imagine, the F-line flathead came after that, and the knucklehead was the third engine design in the Harley production line. The flathead was different because, as the name kind of suggests, it just had cooling fans on top, and the intake and exhaust valves were off to the side. Now that reduced compression, reduced horsepower, and in fact this motorcycle was a whole 10% increase in power output due to this overhead valve design. When you have an overhead valve like in the knucklehead engine, what happens is that heat is dissipated a little bit better. Oiling always is an issue for getting oil to the top, and that was especially the issue in former models. The flatheads, for example, had a drip type oil system where the oil would literally drip through the engine to the bottom of the pan and would never be recirculated again. It's as bad as it sounds, you can imagine, right? Because having too little oil as well as too much at the bottom with the sloshing, where all the oil accumulates, is just, it's not ideal. All that sloshing is like swimming through honey or something. You know, it just creates extra resistance. All that was addressed with the brand new dry sump lubrication system. Think about that. So the modern vehicles in today's, I believe, Aprilia line will have it. My Honda XR 650L as well, and my DRZ 400 by Suzuki. Everything else that I've owned in the past 20 years of riding had the traditional wet sump, as we call it, where the oil accumulates at the bottom of the oil pan. Here we have a fuel pump right here, and the fuel pump actually propels the oil through the system, and there's a scavenge pump in the case here that recirculates that oil. What that guarantees is simply better cooling, better oiling of especially the top of the engine. Now, this is important because that's the part of the engine that actually gets dry the most and the quickest. Harley had problems with the first iterations of this bike in 1936, where the valve springs were very weak and would break, and the gasket material at the time could not really accommodate the expansion required as modern gasket materials do, and oil leakage was always an issue. But before Harley hit showroom floors, they addressed all those issues, and by 39 the valve springs themselves were improved. So this motorcycle carries all of those improvements until 1941, where the bigger engine was introduced. That was designated as the F model. As mentioned, this is a 61 cubic inch motor. That's about 1,000, so it's basically a liter bike. And then it moved on to 74-inch cubic motor, the F line, and that became the basically 1212 actually cc's. So improvement in power. It always remained the case that these earlier Harleys maintained their value more. Now it's very interesting because the production numbers for the late model that ran all the way till 47, so after the war, reached 14,000 that last year. The year before, 12,000, and the year before that, so 45, at the end of the World War, there was only 1,500 of these made. So that's why the pre-war ones always have greater value. And stay tuned till the end, and I'll tell you how you can get your hands on exactly that with this one here. Beautiful, beautiful motorcycle with a ton of improvements that still remain to this, well, to the modern day. 1999 basically is when they stopped using the flywheel, the 8.5-inch flywheel that's in here. So it's pretty interesting. Even the iconic gas tank, the teardrop gas tank used in Fat Bob's, was first utilized in this motorcycle. The oil pan, the iconic Harley horseshoe oil pan that's mounted to the frame, that was first introduced on this motorcycle. Of course, it houses the 6-volt battery in there. The circuitry on the motorcycle and the charging has never been an issue, and for that reason you could still ride these motorcycles. It's pretty incredible. So we turn on the fuel flow. There's 2 tanks, they communicate, so we'll turn just this one on. Fuel's flowing. Open it down, the choke, full gas once, choke all the way up and then to the one below. Okay, we're gonna prime it 3 times. Now we're gonna turn it on and we're gonna kick the bike to life. Love it! Love it! So that was the engine line of Harley. Again, this is the 3rd one, F-type flathead knucklehead, followed by, in 1948, the panhead, looks like a pan, then shovelhead, basically looks like an upside down coal shovel, and then we have the more modern stuff, the Evolution, another motorcycle that I used to own, excellent reliability on that engine. After the Evolution came the twin cam, and then the Milwaukee 8, also known as the Revolution. So that's basically the lineage, and again, some of the parts in this motorcycle and designs have followed through to the modern age. So most of you that ride Harleys ride Harleys that were very much influenced by the design of the knucklehead. Speaking of, one such improvement has been the transmission. This is a constant mesh 4-gear transmission, much improved from the previous models where basically you just had to ram the individual gear in. Here, what that does is prolong the transmission itself, and you can ride to your heart's desire. And if you ever need to do any repairs or any kind of work on the starter gear, actually Baker makes an excellent starter gear for this motorcycle. I ride a 6-speed Baker transmission in my American Eagle Talon, very rare, locally made Southern California chopper. Take a look at that video. A pretty beautiful bike as well. So I can vouch for them. It does utilize the very reliable Linker carburetor for fuel injection, and it's never left anything to be desired. Speaking of fuel, we get 4 gallons of fuel in this split tank design that immediately takes your eyes to the gorgeous Cat Eye Speedometer. I want to actually show you how rare some of these parts have become. For example, these gas cap covers. The last time you were able to find them original, I think the record they sold for on eBay was $5,000. So it's pretty incredible. Now you'll find them refurbished, obviously, but in better form, because the rubber, of course, on the inside, after so many years, expands, and now they have leather on the interior, for example, so to mitigate any leakage. Of course, the modern refurbished engines have better gaskets, so leaking is not anywhere near as an issue as on the original, right? The seats are also redone. You can ride this I believe it's like 4mm thick leather for the seats, and the seat itself rides on a little spring, internal spring that's not visible on these early models, and I just find that very beautiful. What it does when you see the motorcycle without the luggage especially is it beautifully displays what in Harley world is known as the line. This gorgeous frame and this sexy design where the line leads all the way down to the rear axle was in production until I believe 56, 57, when a rear shock was finally introduced for the soft tails, and that altered the angles towards the rear, and you lost that sexy look. I think this is what a motorcycle looks like. To me, this Harley design is so powerful because you can speak to non-riders. You can speak to general public that has no experience with motorcycles, and they would probably be able to answer that this is a Harley if you asked them, right? Because it's so identifiable just in virtue of that line itself, the tank. Of course, the paint has always been Harley's strong suit, and in fact, this was the last year that Harley utilized this Comet style logo here. This actually has gold and silver flakes in this hand-painted logo here that's absolutely beautiful. There's just this baby blue color is incredible in the sunlight, under the street lights, under the moonlight. It just makes you want to ride the motorcycle. The chrome is in perfect condition. Again, 99 out of 100 from the American Classic Motorcycle Association. So immediately after the production of this year, only 700, I believe 99 civilian models were produced because everything was shifted towards the world war effort. And materials, of course, were rationed for the war effort, including aluminum and steel, everything else you can imagine. However, Harley did try to produce this motorcycle for the war itself, for the US Army. And that was, it was a very specific knucklehead trike. It was designated as a TA model. I believe it had 68 cubic inches, so it was upped a little bit to support the extra weight of another 2 soldiers on the back. And it had a 44 Dana axle that was made shorter from the car manufacturing to accommodate the motorcycle. However, it is assumed that only 18 of these were produced. They never really took off because, fortunately, unfortunately, I drive one, my partner drives one, the Jeep Wrangler took hold. So the little Willys Jeep just consumed all those contracts, and the 18 that were produced, I believe there's only 7 to be believed to be still running to this day of that TA model. However, immediately post-war, what Harley did was actually produce another motorcycle, a trike. It was called the Survey car. You might have seen these. I've actually had the chance to see this bike. They were produced until the 70s, and that was called the WLA model. It did not feature the knucklehead engine, but that vehicle was extremely popular for Harley and very successful. I believe over 90,000 of those were produced and sold abroad to serve as delivery vehicles, as transportation of goods, etc. Front brake, I believe front brake only, interestingly enough. Why? Because at that time there were still not that many asphalt roads that required, you know, both excellent braking, let's just put it that way, right? The rear brake was introduced at a later point, and the front brake was also made 60, I believe, % larger in the second version of this motorcycle, the F models, right, the bigger models. Suicide shifter, of course, really sexy. If you can pull up to a bar, shift in your, they call it suicide, of course, because you got to take your hand off the single brake that this motorcycle has, not having the rear. Now, these are increasingly difficult to find. I believe there's only one guy in Michigan producing these tops right here for the shifter knob, and of course the 4-speed constant mesh transmission, just a beauty to ride. Designated at reaching speeds of about 100 miles an hour. I think this was the first motorcycle to also break the 120 average mile an hour speed record at the race. So pretty incredible motor overall. And in the first generation, so the smaller engine, the basically 1936, the compression ratio was at 6.5 to 1. That was increased to 7 to 1. Nothing amazing by our standards, but by those standards at that time in the 30s and 40s, that was again a 10% increase from what Harley was producing until then with the flathead. The race, of course, in the wartime effort was to outproduce and outgun the very successful BMW R75 sidecar rigs. Now, Harley Davidson did produce sidecar rigs. You learn this when you take a tour with me on our Pegasus sidecar tours in San Diego. If you're ever in town, I'd love to show you around. I have photos of the Harley Davidson on a sidecar rig, which then replaced the need for 6 men to only operate basically two men were then able to operate this Vickers machine gun unit, which was very heavy, required a lot of cooling water, it required a lot of munition. Now you have a rider and you have a sidecar and you have a much more mobile machine. the trench warfare nature of the war. This was in World War I. Did not have those bikes see a lot of action, but it's still a beautiful motorcycle to behold. I love sidecars. Take a look at our website if you ever want to get into sidecars, if you want to get training, or if you just want to take a tour, or if you want to open up your Pegasus sidecar business in your town under our name and our brand recognition. We'd love to help you out with that. We only use the Honda Goldwing 1800 with a Champion sidecar 2-seater, so we can take 3 other folks on a ride. Private narrated tours of San Diego, best way to see the place. Now, if you'd like some professional photographs of this gorgeous, gorgeous motorcycle, take a look in the description. You'll find a link to my business partner and amazing photographer, Peng, and you can click on the website, browse through his amazing work, get inspired by some of his incredible landscape photography of this most traveled man in the world that I personally know and have the pleasure of calling friend. And you can choose the photos there to display on your wall, to look at every day, to have something gorgeous to show to your sons and daughters, and to basically teach them what great engine design used to be like when they grow up in a totally electrified world where you don't hear it, you don't smell it, you're totally alienated from the machine, unlike with this gorgeous Harley. So, aside from all the very, very successful design changes that made this motorcycle succeed in the market for over a decade for Harley, there was also one notable name that had his influence on the sales as well, and that was the racer Joe Petralli. Now, that man, he was Harley's only factory rider for good reason. It just sufficed to have him on the team, and only him, because he was doing some insane things with this motorcycle. He had his version of the knucklehead, bored out, of course, different pistons, higher compression, to break some land speed records and other world records. You can see photos of him climbing the hill with this thing and the Harley vertical in air, saluting the heavens. Pretty incredible at the time. Of course, black and white photography. But on Daytona Beach, Florida, he actually set the land speed record on this motorcycle that stood for many, many years. And he did so after first attempting in a completely customized shell for aerodynamics. Now, that shell made his front climb up. He almost lost it. So he removed everything except the parts that were protecting here the suspension, so that it's this beautiful Springer suspension, so that it's not catching the wind. And he then prompted to actually achieve the land speed record at the time. His winnings were $20,000. $20,000 in today's money, and $1,000 in his day. And $1,000 in his day could buy 3 of these motorcycles. Pretty incredible, I think. So I'm sure so many of you are finally asking, okay, so how deep do your pockets have to be to own something like this? The better question is, how much is this going to be valued going forward? As you know, especially here in California, we're moving to electric vehicles, and all of this that's actually road-worthy still, and not only a museum piece, is just going to explode in value over the next decades. That's a guarantee, especially these pre-war Harleys. This motorcycle is being offered at $150,000. If you know you want this motorcycle, contact me, and I promise we'll make it as smooth of an operation as possible. Located in beautiful sunny San Diego. Look through our video. We're going to be offering a review of a gorgeous C1 Corvette as well, and other classic cars. But for the time being, if you want to make a move on this bike, do it soon, because the owner is seriously considering putting it on Mecum at the end of March. So this is in about 2-3 weeks time. So definitely reach out if you see yourself as the next worthy owner of this vehicle. So there it is, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this review as much as I've enjoyed being with the bike. Thank you again for watching. I appreciate you being here. As you know, 10% of all proceeds of this channel go towards finding a cure for children's cancer. I think this month the vote has overwhelmingly been to St. Jude's. That's what we intend to do, and you being here supports that and supports the work of this independent channel. Thank you again, and until next time, Nick, I'm out.